In today's episode, I'll be talking about my reaction to the death of the president of the church, Thomas S. Monson, and my reaction to the reaction from some corners of Mormondom to the New York Times obituary of him. In addition, we'll profile Lane, a gay Mormon who lives in the Seattle area. Let's look for rainbows together, y'all. On January 3rd, 2018, now less than 2 weeks ago, President Thomas S. Monson died. He spent over 50 years as either an apostle or as the president of the church. He is rightly remembered by Mormons everywhere as embodying some of the best things about Mormonism. He seemed remarkably devoted, both in word and deed, to strengthening the feeble knees, and to pure religion as we read in James 1, verse 27, which is, quote, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, end quote. To those of my generation, I think we knew him primarily as this towering, wise figure who was at once personable and approachable and grandfatherly, but yet incredibly impressive and awe-inspiring at the same time. He was rumored to memorize his conference talks to deliver to every Mormon ear twice a year, 80-plus years old, while we ourselves read our inferior talks to much smaller audiences, and off of something we hand-wrote or printed off of our computer. It was easy to measure yourself against President Monson and feel that you'd found yourself wanting. But then somehow you'd feel like if he were here, he'd tell you to buck up and tell you something that would make you feel good about yourself and motivated to be even better. I also remember noticing before I really saw the significance of this that he generally eschewed the culture wars topics that some others, like Packer and Oakes, would speak on with regularity. He seemed always rather above the fray. But I'm not sure he was, particularly if you look at some of the stuff that happened during his presidency, when it could be assumed that he was at the height of his influence on church policy. I should also note here that for many of his final years, President Monson was in poor health, and many speculated that he suffered from something like dementia, which may have limited how actively he managed the church during some of those years. I'll just say that it's possible this would or should properly alter how we think about Monson's legacy, but since we don't really know the extent or severity or duration of those issues, this is all speculation. One of the first things that happened after he became president was the church's involvement in California's Prop 8 campaign. And during his tenure, we excommunicated several prominent ordained women folks, as well as people like John DeLynn and Rock Waterman, and then the exclusion policy of November 2015 happened towards the end of his tenure. And some of these issues were brought up, and in a prominent place, in the obituary in the New York Times. Now, there are all kinds of different issues that Mormons have objected to varying degrees of justification and coherence in my view. I'll bring them up as I've heard them, and to try to be as charitable to them as I can, and think they merit. I'll also focus the bulk of my time on what I think is the best argument of the bunch, because I think it's good practice to construe people's arguments, with which you ultimately disagree, as strongly as you can. The first draft of complaints comes from the tone of the article, and which issues were brought up and not brought up. Some folks felt like the obituary wasn't a celebration of his life, but focused on the controversial topics that the church became embroiled in, specifically campaigning against gay marriage, the exclusion policy, and a refusal to ordain women, or to give them even much of a more prominent or central role in the church. This to me seems like a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between a public and private obituary. This can be made all the more confusing that Mormon media, especially the Deseret News, wrote one that felt and read very much like one that his family would have paid to have printed in the local paper. A private obituary is a celebration of a deceased person's life, and negatives and controversies are intentionally left out. A public obituary is meant to describe and interpret the life and times of a public figure, warts and all. While I can see why if you think you're getting the former and you get the latter you'd be dismayed or bothered, I still think the issue is more with your lack of understanding than the author. Next, we have folks who viewed the perceived criticism through a partisan lens. There were articles in conservative publications like the National Review complaining of how progressives love to bash the church and broaden the attack to be about how progressives supposedly hate and criticize all those with sincerely held religious beliefs. Now, I've tried very hard to avoid partisan politics on this podcast, but I'll say a few things here. First, while I think it's fair to point out that perhaps a majority of journalists for some news outlets like the New York Times may swing farther to the left than the right in the U.S. political context, I think this idea of an inherently and stridently left-leaning, quote-unquote, mainstream media is really overstated. Either way, it's a mistake to compare an outlet like the New York Times, which does not have an intentional, obvious partisan bent, to ones like Fox News or the National Review, which do. This is not to say that it's wrong to have an intentional partisan bent per se, but if you want to make sound comparisons, you'd be better comparing something like MSNBC or Mother Jones to Fox News and the National Review, rather than acting like Fox News and the New York Times are opposite sides of the same coin, when they're not. It's also true that many progressives have raised issues and criticized the church, and several, in my estimation, even unfairly. My mind is first drawn to MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell's diatribe against Mormons on his show when Mitt Romney was running for President of the United States. But to pretend that this is an issue only on one side of the partisan aisle in the United States is willful self-delusion, I think. Surrogates for both Rick Perry and Donald Trump, for example, have had some really unfair negative things to say about us, too. The truth about politicized anti-Mormon speech is that we are one of the few groups to really get it from both sides. Part of the blame in my mind for that phenomenon is our own fault, because we don't take any concrete steps to punish people for public anti-Mormon speech on an institutional level. We could look to the successes that organizations like the Anti-Defamation League have had in removing anti-Semitic speech from all but the fringes of the public square, at least mostly, and wonder why we don't do something like that. I'm not saying we must, but if there's a way to legitimately and successfully get rid of something we don't like and we don't do it, we can't really complain as loudly when it doesn't go away on its own. I've also heard from people who think that the way the obituary was written may have been okay in a vacuum, but compared to recent obituaries by the same publication of controversial figures such as Hugo Chavez and Hugh Hefner, it seems he got a more scathing or negative treatment than those people. Well, I think there may be some truth to that. I'm not sure that anti-Mormon animus is to blame. The readers of the New York Times would mostly have heard of both Hugh Hefner and Hugo Chavez, and would have some informed opinions on both, whereas the average reader, while she likely knows about the Mormon Church and may even personally know some Mormons, would almost certainly not know who Thomas S. Monson was without prompting. Furthermore, whether we like it or not, to many secular readers of the news, the most newsworthy things that President Monson did, or didn't do during his tenure, were the things that were mentioned that caused people some consternation. Indeed, there are few reasons for a non-Mormon who's not at all that familiar with the Mormon Church to know or care about Monson's speeches about caring for Mormon widows, or about our humanitarian efforts. After all, that's what churches do, right? If a church pushes back strongly against societal trends toward greater acceptance of queer people and women, that's news, and it draws eyeballs. And at the end of the day, that's the job of news media if they want to stay on air or in print. Lastly, I heard from some who thought that the issues brought up were fair and should have been mentioned. However, they thought that some issues that could have portrayed the church more positively, or given more context to some of the controversial stances that the church took under Monson's presidency, were left out. Furthermore, these folks said, if this was the death of the Dalai Lama or Pope Francis, the tone would have been more positive, and controversies less prominent. I actually think this is at least somewhat true, and I think this is the best argument of the bunch. I think it's true that an obituary in the New York Times about Pope Francis would tread at least a little softer on the Catholic Church's quote-unquote failure to better integrate queer Catholics or to ordain women as priests. A friend pointed out to me that the article might have properly mentioned the Church's efforts to support the U.S. taking in more refugees, or supporting a politically middle-of-the-road effort towards immigration reform, or even Utah's relatively progressive political protections for queer people that the Church was instrumental in bringing to pass. And I think all of those are fair points. But there are a few things that still make these arguments come up a little wanting for me. First, the way that the church involvement in pushing back against the legalization of gay marriage, or giving a greater place to women within our hierarchy, are presented to the faithful as positive things that our leaders did, and reflect their devotion to God's will, regardless of what political opinions of the world may have been on these subjects. While I concede the point that the New York Times didn't write about these issues as positively as they could have done, those holding the opposite viewpoint would have to concede that so doing isn't their job or role, and they shouldn't be expected to put a positive spin on it. The fact remains that if a secular publication writes about something we did that we view as a positive move, it's justly puzzling to see so many Mormons view writing about that positive thing as a negative thing. I think it reveals one of a number of confusing things about how we see our actions when they're reflected outside a Mormon lens. Sometimes we seem to want to do what we think is right, and to congratulate ourselves for going against the supposedly wicked ways of the world, but we want that same world, who we always knew was opposing us, to also congratulate us for doing it. It's as if we want to position ourselves as the martyr, but we don't want to suffer the martyr's fate. Or, alternatively, we don't like the actual moment of having to face up to the consequences of our actions and the pain and suffering we cause to those we call brothers and sisters who are in the pews with us, and we are actually much more conflicted about what we've done than the projections of self-assuredness that we portray to the outside world. Either way, It seems like we need to engage in some deep introspection to work out our own issues before we project them on others who report on the things that we've done that we know aren't popular, but for which we claim to be universally proud about. Lastly, if you're going to tell me how upset you are that the church's position on queer people wasn't accurately portrayed, I'll listen, but I'll find it much more compelling if you're against inaccurate portrayals generally. If you want me to be concerned that the New York Times' explanation of our stances on queer issues wasn't fair, complete, or left out a lot of complexity, I may agree with you, but I may also want to see your record criticizing the church for its decades of portrayals of queer people that also wasn't fair, complete, and lacked needed complexity too. Where was your zeal against inaccurate portrayals when the now intentionally out-of-print Miracle of Forgiveness said people were turned gay by masturbating? Where was your righteous opposition when Elder Packer joked about how much he wanted to punch a gay missionary and told the assembled priesthood for a generation how inherently deviant and predatory we are? Where do you stand as we have told generation after generation that our very natures are weaknesses, and that our identities and our love is counterfeit and a tool of Satan? Where were you when the church ruined untold numbers of marriages and families, when we told thousands of gay men and women to get married to fix our queerness, and to hide it as a secret from our spouses, only to demonize us as selfish or sinful when those unions predictably often fall apart? Why can I not find anything you've said against the barbaric and torturous and crippling quote-unquote aversion therapies? Seriously, read about them. They'll make you physically ill. To try to cure gay men that were practiced with church approval for decades at places like BYU and elsewhere. Where are the petitions you signed denouncing the church, telling mothers they made us gay by keeping us too close, or that our fathers made us gay by being too distant, or that lesbians are created by sexual abuse? Where's the hue and cry against leaders who tell our parents not to let us stay overnight with our partners at their homes, even as adults after we come out, if they're queer partners, or tell us never, ever to come out, and to avoid associating with any other queer people, the very people we need for support? And, by the way, that last bit is still linked to in the Leader's Handbook. Where was your public outrage when they charged queer people who marry whom they love with apostasy, and barred their children from full fellowship in their church? If I only hear one and not the other, it's not inaccurate or incomplete portrayals that you care about, your loud protests notwithstanding. I had a friend tell me he thinks about the church the way he does his family. He can criticize the church all he wants, but if someone else does it, he'll have words with them. I get that, but at the same time, you call me brother. The church is my family too. I know that most people naturally assume that if you're queer, you're no longer Mormon. We need to stop throwing us away and out in our minds, Joe. How are you concerned for the church, but you have none for the closeted queer kid in the pews that's been praying for years for God to fix her, who may not even make it to adulthood? How, when the church decides to punch us again, do you always take their side? How do we become the enemy just by existing? You have no idea how hard we work to make church work. You have no idea the price we pay. We envy how comfortable church is for you. And for most of us who find a way to stay, most of us are resigned to the fact that church will always hurt. And I respected and admired and sustained President Monson every day of my life, even when it meant, as it often did, that I couldn't really respect and admire and sustain myself in so doing. I knew that was the choice I had, and I made and make the choices I do willingly. But let's not get ourselves confused as to where the pain comes from that I feel. Don't tell me that the church is perfect and the people aren't. As true as it is that President Monson taught some wonderful and true things and went about doing good, it's equally as true that every year that he was an apostle or president of the church, we taught wrong, harmful things about your queer brothers and sisters. If we're about the truth, and not just the truth that makes us feel comfortable and good about ourselves, we've got to acknowledge that the church we rely on to tell us the revealed truth, straight from God's mouth, got it wrong, and still gets it wrong every day for the last 50 plus years. And if you can only manage outrage for an obituary in the New York Times talking quote-unquote negatively about how we treat queer Mormons, and not for the wrong we did and do to those same queer Mormons, I guess I was never really brother to you.
Now it's time to focus on sleeping through the night. Giving up on right.
Okay, so now we'll be hearing from Lane and hear his story of growing up as a gay Mormon man. And before we do that, just a quick programming note. Lane and the woman who's interviewing him talk about how they heard in the podcast's first episode that I was once attracted almost exclusively to men, and then sort of developed a taste for women later. They say that because I said this, but as I've had an opportunity to reflect on my own experiences, I'm now realizing I've probably always been bi. I know it may sound weird, but at the time, the only vocab I knew was straight and gay, and if you like boys as a boy, you were gay. Also, the women I was attracted to, and still am attracted to, aren't the ones you see portrayed as attractive in media. Not that you necessarily care, but I'm pretty much only attracted to large, round, even chubby folks of pretty much all genders. So, if you're preoccupied with how problematic your attraction to men is, and you're attracted to women that the dominant culture tells you shouldn't be attracted to, maybe now it's beginning to make sense how a bi boy might have thought he was gay way back in the bad old days. Anyway, with that clarification out of the way, let's hear from Lane.
Well, can you introduce yourself for us, Lane?
Absolutely. That's half the introduction is. But yes, my name is Lane Valentine, and I am an LGBT Mormon.
Can you tell us which of the LGBTQA plus you are?
Yes. Oh, that's the longest acronym.
It's very long. And there's a plus at the end, like to even more.
It's true. And it has good purpose. I am specifically a gay man.
All right. And I know this isn't about me, but I want to say at the top, because I know that this format is for specifically for LGBTQA plus members, that I am straight. Who is interviewing you. It's going to be about you and not me.
Dang straight.
Mostly. So, can you tell me about your family life growing up and being gay and Mormon? Because you grew up in a Mormon household, right?
That is correct. Yes. So I kind of growing up in a Mormon household as a gay man was interesting. But I wasn't one of those people that knew that I was gay when I was 5 years old.
Right.
I found out much later, and then when I realized I was gay, I'm like, that's not true, and I denied it for 10 years. And so that became very, very difficult. But growing up in a Mormon household as a gay man wasn't too bad until I think middle school or so. And then I started realizing that things were different and that there are conflicts, and so there was a lot of secrets and a lot of hiding. And so kind of, I guess, to give a better backstory than that vague generalization. And so I grew up in a very small rural Washington town that had about 3,000 people in it. And so very small town politics, lots of conservative views, even though it's a Washington town. And so there was very much so everyone kind of knows everyone and they know everyone's business. And that can be really nice and heartwarming, or it can be very awful because you feel like that everything you do, everyone will know about. And for me, it was more so the latter. Mostly because I was going against the grind because I was a gay man. And so growing up, my family life was semi-normal. As far as Mormon activity, we went to church every single Sunday, and that was about it. We weren't one of those families that came home and we read the scriptures together or did family prayer. Gotcha. None of that stuff. We just did the church thing and then tried to live it the best we could outside. But it became pretty clear pretty early that at least my father definitely suspected that I was gay. And there was a lot of conversations that happened around the house that were either incredibly insensitive, them not knowing I was gay, or that were, hey, we believe you're gay and we're trying to correct you, kind of a thing.
Why do you think your father thought you were gay? Did he ask you or talk to you about it, or he just implied somehow?
Good question. My dad, I come from kind of an outspoken family, and my dad is more outspoken than I would say some of the rest. Okay. And so maybe it was just some of the things that he said, and maybe I was just a paranoid, super scared gay boy that was afraid of being found out.
Right.
But, the simple conversations of somebody, it comes on TV and there's a new Will and Grace episode, because that was kind of a big thing as I was growing up.
Right.
Was Will and Grace coming out, and that controversy of having gay people, or at least characters that were gay that were main cast. And my dad hated that show, and he hated the concept of it, and he was very outspoken about how dirty and how gross it was and how nobody should do those kind of things. And I heard it a lot, and whether it was because he only said it in my presence, or again, I was paranoid, and I don't know. But I just had the feeling that he knew based off of the things that he said around me.
Okay, that makes sense. And yeah, Will and Grace not only being a show with gay characters, but like celebrating gay culture.
Absolutely.
And that's what the show's about, right? Because there are like lots of shows that like might have a gay character or something, but they're never in focus and they're never, it's not about them.
Right.
Which, you know, I think was really important for people to understand that gay culture exists, is okay, and like part of what this podcast is doing, which is awesome.
Yeah.
How long have you known that you were gay, since we brought that up?
Yeah, good question. It's really hard to pinpoint it.
A specific time.
At a specific time.
Right.
It's funny because I think that there are a lot of memories that I blocked out from middle school and high school.
Okay.
A lot of them involving homosexuality and a lot of them involving my family. That later, as I got older and eventually went through some counseling, that I started to kind of remember them again. And I said, oh, wait, I forgot that ever happened. But now after recovering some extra memories, I think I knew probably when I was around 14.
And that makes sense, because that's when you kind of have like your puberty and sexual feelings,
Right.
generally for the first time. Like I know a lot of people, like you said, say when they're 5 that they know, which is completely possible and probably true. But I think for most people, it's usually around their sexual maturity.
Absolutely. And I think like a lot of, LGBT people in the church, I had a hard time recognizing, because that can oftentimes delay us realizing that we're gay
Right.
for a lot of other reasons.
I was going to ask that, if you think that contributed with your
Oh.
family being so negative and
Absolutely.
living in a small town too.
Correct. Yeah, I really think that did, because not only did it discourage me from ever wanting to have that path, but also, you grow up in the church and you're taught about temple marriages and how about that's between a man and a woman. And I really wanted that, because why wouldn't I? I was a faithful member of the church. Still am, but I really, really wanted that in my life. And so, of course, it was I think that this guy's cute, but maybe that's not really what's going on. I really want a temple marriage. I can't think about that.
Right.
And so it was a lot of internal turning that switch off, pretending it didn't exist, hiding it. But then again, there are times, some of the memories that have come back to me, I remember as a kid going on a youth temple trip. We were doing a trip for baptisms for the dead. And when I was there, I remember praying after I had done baptisms, and I was just kind of waiting and sitting in the temple and enjoying the spirit there.
Right.
I remember praying so fervently that my homosexuality would go away. And I was probably like 14 years old. And so I definitely knew that there was something deeper than this, maybe I'm attracted to guys, but it doesn't impact me.
Sure.
Because I remember years and years of praying that would happen, or that it would go away, years that I would understand why it was happening to me. Even as I was driving over here and I was kind of trying to get in the mindset of recording, I was remembering my patriarchal blessing and how me approaching that patriarchal blessing, how I was afraid it was going to reveal that I was a gay person.
Really?
And how I was afraid it was going to tell me I would never be married. And so I refused to let anyone come with me. I didn't want my parents to be there because I didn't want them to know that I was gay.
Right.
And I didn't want the blessing itself to out me and give me advice on how to live as a gay person.
Right.
But I also remember very specifically now that I was petrified that it was going to tell me that I wouldn't get married to a woman. And I remember thinking, if it doesn't mention a spouse, I do not know if I can stay in the church. And I prayed and fasted and prayed and fasted for days leading up to my patriarchal blessings, specifically asking Heavenly Father to tell me that I would have a wife.
Wow.
And it did. And it's like the most out of place sentence in everything. Like it doesn't make
flow
sense with any context whatsoever. And after that, the rest of the time, all the conversation about my wife, because it does say a woman in there somewhere. The rest of it doesn't refer to her as a woman, doesn't refer to it as a spouse, refers to it as a companion, and it's super weird and really vague and doesn't make sense. But without that sentence, I would have left the church like 10 years ago, because I wouldn't have ever believed that there was any hope for me to stay in the gospel.
Right.
And I would have just given up.
And I'm sure Heavenly Father knew that, and probably, because you asked so fervently, put that in there to make sure that you would stay, because I'm sure he wants, I really believe he wants all of his children to be in the church and to be trying their hardest. And that makes sense why it would be out of place, too, because he probably was like, oh, okay, well, it sounds like you need this, but maybe this is not what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to me to hear how much anxiety that gave you about patriarchal blessing, something that you should be really excited for and should be like something to look forward to instead of something to be scared of.
Right.
Although I think that's a pretty normal fear for most kids, I guess, because a lot of people who are Mormon get patriarchal blessings, and they think that if it doesn't say they have a spouse, that they're not going to get married, which is very strange and very sad. But I'm sure it's just compounded on when you're gay and you're worried not only that it's going to somehow out you to your parents, which would be terrible, and I'm sure Heavenly Father would not do that, but also that it's going to somehow like curse you almost. It's just very sad to hear.
Yeah, I was afraid to be bound by what it had said.
Right.
And so there's a lot of pressure for it to say things that would lead my life to where I wanted it to be, because I wanted to marry a woman, I wanted to have a temple marriage, and I wanted to make that work, and I wanted to believe it was possible because I wasn't at the time.
Right.
I just didn't inside feel it was, and that gave me the hope that I needed to stay in the church as long as I did.
Well, I'm glad that it helped you stay.
Likewise.
So when did you finally come to terms with the fact that you were gay? Because it sounds like it's a long process for you. Since you don't even remember some of the things from like middle school, that you have repressed memories from that. And then you said 23 was when you finally got there?
Yeah, about that. Okay. So kind of some context leading up to it some more. It was around 23 that I realized I was gay, and probably about 23 was wrong. Past is confusing.
It's fine.
I'm 29 currently. It was about 25 I realized I was gay. 27 I started coming to terms with it.
Okay.
Last year was all just dealing with that issue, and then this year I'm very comfortable with it. But a bit of a delay in there that I just really feel is important to throw in is that I think part of the reason why it took me so long not only to recognize that I was gay, but to come to terms with it was before I got my patriarchal blessing when I was 16. I had an experience where my father did indeed find out that I was gay, and it was terribly negative, and we've never spoken about it again.
What happened?
And so I, like a lot of young men or young people, viewed pornography. That's a thing that people do.
Sure.
Especially when you have a lot of sexual feelings that you can't in any way show, even towards like holding hands or kissing towards anyone you're attracted to.
Right.
And so that was something that I viewed, and it was always, of course, gay pornography because I'm a gay man. And eventually my father found out, like the computer crashed or something. He had someone come and look at it.
Gotcha.
Files, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how to protect things.
Did you erase history?
Right. Like, I did erase history.
Oh, okay.
I was smart enough for that, at least.
Good.
But I didn't know about viruses and how all that works.
Right.
But my dad...
you downloaded a virus? Is that what happened?
I don't know.
Maybe? Okay.
Who knows? Something bad happened. My dad found out. He asked me about it. And I just remember that he knew, obviously, that I was viewing... that it was me who was viewing. And I said, yes, it was. I was the one who was viewing the gay porn. And then I remember him asking, Lane, are you gay? And I said, I don't know.
Sure.
Because I didn't. I didn't entirely know what that meant.
Right.
I didn't know what that was supposed to feel like. I was trying not to feel it. And so he asked me again, Lane, are you gay? And I said, I don't know. And then he kind of explained the church's policy on homosexuality. That was, it's not a sin to be gay, but it's a sin to act on it kind of a thing. And he said, based off of that, do you feel that you're gay? And I said, I don't know, I think I am. And then he goes, Lane, this determines your life. Are you gay?
Wow.
And I said, no, I'm not gay. And he goes, that's right. And the conversation ended and he left.
Right.
And that was crushing and terrible and horrifying.
Of course.
And I just remember feeling so hopeless, and so much was burned into me at that moment that this can never be a thing. I cannot allow this to take place.
Right.
I cannot allow this to happen. And I had eventually, a few years later in high school, my senior year, it was a very hard year. High school is hard for a lot of people. My senior year was particularly tough, as I was preparing to go on a mission, and I was still trying to curb feelings of homosexuality and that desire. And I met like the one gay guy in our school. We had like one lesbian and one gay person in our school.
Because in your tiny town.
Right, because we had a tiny town.
That's impressive that you have so many then.
And I know, right? Good job, Emily.
And out, apparently.
And yes, 2 of them were out, at least that I know of. There's
Right.
only 2. And so they were both in my grade. And the gay guy and I ended up becoming friends through choir, like one of the most gay ways to become friends. And so we did that, and eventually he started kind of hitting on me and stuff, and I thought he was kind of there to like help me out, and then I felt like it wasn't supposed to be that, and I felt very manipulated and controlled, and very dirty about the whole situation, and I just felt like the intentions were wrong, and I ran as far in the closet as I could go. I just ran away. I said, no, this is terrible, this is, we didn't even do anything really, but he was avid about wanting to do things, and that wasn't what I wanted from that relationship. And I just was like, no, these people are terrible people, generalizing all gays.
Right.
And I just...
And excluding yourself from
and
that.
excluding myself from that. And I ran as far in the closet as you could. And I forgot that happened for years. I just literally forgot any of that happened.
I think that's kind of typical that gay people who aren't in kind of a welcoming community in their family or their friends, they often find some sort of like mentor figure in some way, it seems. But often that person has so much power over you because like they're your only person that those relationships are really easy to make manipulative. And that's one of the good things I think about things like this podcast is that once you kind of talk about it, people are like, oh, it's okay if I talk about it. And then you don't end up kind of in these pigeonholed manipulative relationships, and you can just be in good relationships, hopefully.
Right. That is ideal. And so then, after that kind of leading up to me figuring out I was gay again, the time 2, I went on my mission. Mission was fine. I was pretty good there. I didn't really have a lot of attraction to women, but I was like, hey, I'm on a mission. I'm not supposed to be having attraction towards women.
Perfect.
I'm doing great. I'm super righteous. This is what things are supposed to be. So I totally ignored that.
Love it.
Then I come home and I start dating some people, like kind of trying to go on dates, and nothing really happened. And I wasn't... Women, correct. Thank you. And nothing was really happening, and I always had an excuse. Oh, well, maybe it's just not the right time, or maybe I'm not in the time of my life where I need to be. And I kept on reading that one sentence by Patriarchal Blessing that's like super, super vague about time and weird things. And I'm like, oh, cool, it will just happen. But it was always hard. And then I actually really found out I was gay because I got engaged to a woman. That's really kind of what led it. And it was interesting. I met this woman, kind of a funny story. I met her at a party while I had just got a new girlfriend. I remember that I got this new girlfriend, and after she became my girlfriend, I thought, oh, I made a terrible decision. Why did I do this?
Big mistake.
I don't want to do this. And it had nothing to do with her. Whatsoever. I think she's super pleasant. We're still friends on Facebook.
Great.
She's married and has a husband. Good for her. But it just didn't feel right immediately, and I just instantly regretted it. And so I was kind of trying to figure out how to like break up with her after just making her my girlfriend and not crush her hopes and dreams forever.
Which clearly you didn't. Congrats.
Yay. And so I remember we go to like this just simple get-together type of a party. Somebody had brought a date, and I remember that his date, I couldn't keep my eyes off of her. And I was like, oh, this is very interesting. And I was trying to be very, casual about it because how rude.
You have a girlfriend and she's someone else's date.
Yeah, absolutely. How rude.
And
so eventually after I break up with my girlfriend and I don't see this girl around, the girl that I found attractive, I don't find her around really anymore. I kind of asked her date and I was like, hey, so what's the deal with so-and-so? I'll give her a fake name. Let's call her Julie.
Okay.
And so... I'm like, hey, what's the deal with Julie? I haven't really seen her in church. And he goes, oh, yeah, she goes to a family ward. I said, oh, are you guys dating? And he goes, well, I keep trying to go on dates with her, but she's always really busy, which I know what that means.
Right. Everybody knows that means she's not into you.
Correct. Yeah. Even a closeted gay man knows that. And so I
think it's the same in gay culture, too, right?
Right.
It's the same.
Right.
It's just a
Or we just
thing.
don't talk to you at all.
Yeah. Or the freeze out.
Yeah, ghosting is great. It's the worst. But... so I said, I was very, very bold and proud of myself. And I said, oh, well, do you think that I could get her number from you and ask her on a date?
Yeah.
Because I had no other source of contact because she didn't go to our ward. And I only knew her first name.
Right. That's not going to work for you.
Today is Julie. And so he was shocked, but said yes. And I called her up and I said, hey, I'm not sure if you remember who I am. And she did remember who I was. Because we had talked a little bit. And apparently she had come to a church activity one time looking specifically to find me. And we ran into each other for a couple of minutes. And then, something else happened and we had to go our separate ways. And so I asked her on a date. We went on a date. And I remember after the first date, I remember feeling things I had never really felt before. And I was so excited, and I was talking to one of my best friends, and I was like, hey, this is the girl I'm going to marry. Right. After the first date, I just really, really knew, and, it was a very, very quick relationship. We dated for a little under 2 months before I proposed. Very Mormon of me.
Right. It's insanity to me.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Being a convert.
Right. And so I did that, and then we were engaged for about 3 months, and it was about a month away from our wedding, and then all of a sudden everything in our relationship started to fall apart. And as things were falling apart and we eventually broke up, and there was a lot of issues with our relationship, and we were moving way too fast and didn't really understand enough about each other. Right. And the way that she handled issues and the way that I handled issues were stark opposite, but we never had issues to handle because our relationship was so short.
Young. Yeah.
And so then once we started trying to handle those, we realized we didn't know how to do it together, and it was just terrible, and it imploded extremely quickly. And was negative, and I went back to BYU, Idaho. I had gone to BYU, Idaho before, after my mission, was there for a little bit, for about 3 years. I dropped out to have a heart surgery, moved back home because I was dropped out of college. I didn't really have anywhere to go.
Right.
And stayed at home for about 1.5 years, which is where I met Julie. And then we decided together that we were going to return to BYU, Idaho. She was going to work and I was going to continue to go to school. We broke up. I changed my married housing to single housing and continued to go to BYU, Idaho, which was good because it got me out of town.
Right.
But I remember that while I was at BYU, Idaho, and I was trying to recover in those next couple of semesters, I was there for 2 more semesters before I left again. I remember, trying to go on other dates or wanting to do so, and I never had any desire to, and I could always use the excuse of, oh, well, I'm still in love, or I'm still broken up over this, or whatever. Yeah. But finally I realized, and I don't exactly know how it happened, but it clicked in my head, that what I felt for Julie wasn't love. What I felt for Julie was attraction.
Sexual attraction.
Right. And I hadn't felt that before.
For a woman.
Kind of for anyone. I mean, I probably did feel it for a guy, but again, I kind of blocked out some memories at this time. And I was trying not to so hard that I had never actually allowed that to happen. We had chemistry, and I had never had chemistry with someone in that way, let alone emotional chemistry with a woman.
Right.
And I just knew that love felt different than everything else. And to me, feeling attraction for a woman was different than anything I'd ever felt before. Right. And I was convinced I was head over heels in love with her immediately because I simply found her attractive. And so once I realized that, I was reading, and I was kind of pondering over that idea. I was reading a blog post, actually. Somebody posted it on Facebook, and it kind of trickled my way, I think by the hand of God, truly. And in it was a blog, I think it's called The Unicorn or something. It's by this guy, his name is Josh Weed. He is a marriage and family counselor. He is a gay LDS man married to a woman and has family. Okay. And he had a blog post where he essentially outed himself to the world and said, hey, because people had been reading his blog, but I don't think they knew that he was gay. I don't know. Gotcha. That was literally the only one I've ever read. And he was doing like a question and answering service service, like, I guess, blog post that he had heard from other people and his answers to their questions. And one of them was, if you're married to a woman, how do you know that you're gay? And he said, gay has nothing to do with marriage or about your relationships. Gay has to do with who you are attracted to the majority of the time. And so if there is an attractive woman and an attractive man in front of you, majority of the time, who you're going to be attracted to.
Right.
And I'd never heard it explained so clearly or so simply, but also with the avenue that you could be gay and still have minor attraction towards women in very specific circumstances or anything like that. It was a lot more fluid than I had ever heard sexuality be before.
Right.
And
Everyone says sexuality is a sliding scale.
Right.
Yeah.
And it, allowed like bisexuality to actually be a thing,
right.
And things which I'm not bisexual. I'm super gay.
I was actually going to ask you, like, have you ever thought maybe you were bisexual?
Mm-mm.
No.
She's been the one and only. I'm 29 years old, and I've been attracted to one woman my entire life.
Wow.
I don't think that considers enough to be bisexual.
No, definitely not.
But I realized in that holy crap, I'm a gay person.
Right.
And then after that, I couldn't not see it. And I started admitting it to myself, and I was still trying to go on dates with women because I was like, all right, he's a gay man.
Right.
He's married. He made it work. A lot of gay men have made it work. A lot of,
it's possible.
Other people in the LGBT community have made it work. I'm sure that I can make it work too. And so it was great. This is important. I should probably tell somebody I marry before I marry them so they know what they're getting into.
Right.
But it doesn't impact my life.
Right.
And so I didn't really have to deal with it or confront it. And then my next big relationship was when I was 27. And I had left BYU, Idaho again to go into massage school. I moved back into Washington. I was dating this woman, let's call her Francine. Oh, I don't like that name. That's a terrible name.
It's such an old name.
Give me a better name.
Carol.
Done. Anything's better. I'm sorry to all Francines that are out there. So Carol, so I was dating this woman named Carol, and we had been friends for a really long time, and we kind of slowly decided, hey, maybe we should try dating and see if it works out.
Right.
And this time I had different knowledge going in. This time I knew I was gay. Mm-hmm. And so as Carol, I forgot her fake name already, as Carol and I were talking and decided to start dating, I said, all right, I already knew I wasn't attracted to her.
Right.
Nothing against her. Everyone, like, legitimately, people all over were like, Lane, super well done. And I'm like, really?
Hot.
I see nothing.
I have no idea.
I have nothing at all.
Hilarious.
I had no attraction to her whatsoever. And she was a beautiful woman inside and out, but I just didn't have emotional or physical attraction to her. Mm-hmm. And so I decided, all right, here's really my opportunity to not necessarily pray the gay away, but to pray the straight into my life.
Sure.
I can try that approach because I tried praying the gay away and it just never worked.
Well, and I was really interested listening to Britt talk about how when he was younger he was only really attracted to men, and then now he identifies as bisexual. And so that he kind of figured out that he was also attracted to women eventually. And so it makes sense that possibly you could have thought that, like, that could happen for you too, or that could happen in some sort of way, even if you didn't know his story then.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, that's definitely a possibility.
Right.
And, like, sexuality does evolve over time.
Correct.
So it makes sense.
Yeah, and so I thought I would try a different approach. Maybe I've been asking God the wrong questions, and that's why I haven't been getting the answer I wanted. And so I mostly was just asking repeatedly every single night. Literally, I've never been more fervent in my prayers, in my relationship with the Lord as I was at that time. And I just prayed every single day, please let me be attracted to her. Please let me fall in love with her. And I begged and I begged and I begged and I begged, and we exchanged I love yous, and I did love her. I wasn't in love with her, but I loved her as much as a gay man can love a straight friend, woman, girlfriend, whatever she was to me. But it wasn't the same, and I knew that. And as much as I prayed, I felt small little baby steps where maybe I would feel a little bit more, where we'd be kissing, and I wouldn't just think, oh, when is this going to end? To Dude, I really hated kissing for so long. Everyone talks
so
about
depressing.
No, it is. Everyone was like, "Oh man, making out is the best," and I said,
Right.
"No, it's not. Making out's terrible.
Well,
how can you like that?"
Kissing is not enjoyable if you're not attracted to the person.
Right.
It's just you're touching and it's weird.
Yeah, and I wasn't attracted to these.
But even if it's like a dude you weren't attracted to, it'd be the same thing.
Probably.
It's just like, whoa.
Right. And so I remember just wanting to just be able to enjoy anything.
Right.
And it was just, I mean, I got by, but it got to a certain point where our relationship, you know, I think we were dating for about 6 months at that point, and our relationship either was moving forward or it wasn't.
Right.
We were kind of at a standstill there. And it was obvious that she wanted to move forward. And it was obvious that she could feel, because she even voiced it verbally, that she could feel that she was more invested in the relationship that I was. And like she wanted to see me every day, which is a normal thing, and I didn't care if I saw her every day.
Right.
In fact, I was kind of glad sometimes when she had work and
You couldn't see her.
and I couldn't see her, because then I had time to, be by myself, which isn't my character. I'm extremely.
It's true.
I want to be around people all the time.
But then you wouldn't feel guilty about not being able to see her and not
Absolutely.
wanting to see
Right.
her.
And it just kind of pushed those all away, and all those feelings away. And so I remember one time we went to the temple together, and I was really excited about it. We had never actually done that before, and it had been a long time since I'd gone to the temple. And so we go to the temple together, we get to the celestial room, and we're sitting there and we're praying. And I remember I said, all right, this is the time, like I'm going to find out. And I said, I said a prayer and I asked Heavenly Father, should I marry her? And the answer was extremely loud, and it was no. Do not marry this woman.
Like very stark.
Very. And I was like, I'm sorry, I think you misheard me. Let me ask my question again.
Let's go again.
And so then I asked again, and it was absolutely not. And then I said, should I break up with her? And the answer was yes, but not right now. Do it soon.
Gotcha.
And I was like...
Yeah, please don't break up with anyone in the celestial room. Anyone that's listening.
For sure.
Wow. Way to ruin the temple forever.
I know. I wanted to do that. But I thought, oh my gosh, this is intense. And so we leave, and she's like, oh, wasn't the temple great? And I'm like, yeah, super confusing.
I mean, in a way, great for you, though, because you got a strong, firm answer.
Right.
It's just not what you wanted.
It wasn't what I wanted or expected.
Complicated.
Or what I would have expected God to tell me.
Right.
So therefore, it was confusing.
Because you assume he wants you to get married to a woman.
Right.
And like that this woman seems perfectly good and fine.
Right.
So why not this one?
Right. I mean, honestly, if we were to make a checklist of what I would have described, especially at that time, of what I was looking for in a partner, Carol checked like 95% of the boxes.
Just not the mailbox.
Just not the mailbox. She definitely
And unfortunately,
didn't
that's the
check
most
that
important
one.
box.
Sadly, it's number one.
At this point.
But we were so compatible in so many ways, just not in the ways where it mattered.
Right.
And so I remember I went home, and then things started happening in her life, and she was getting ready to move, and there was kind of I think she had a fallout with a friend or something, I don't remember, but there was some sort of a stress in her life, and that's when I was like, this is where it comes in, and then don't do it right now.
Gotcha.
And so I waited for a little bit, and things kind of calmed down in her life a little bit, and then we ended up having a conversation one time. In person, I did it well.
Good.
I said, hey, can you come over and maybe we can go for a walk or something? And so she did, and we went for a walk, and I just essentially said, I'm so sorry, but I think that it's been clear in our relationship that you are more invested than I am, and I've really, I really think that you deserve the best, and I can't love you the way that you deserve to be loved. And it's as simple as that. It's a terrible answer for you. That sucks for you. You did nothing that was wrong, but I just cannot give you what you want. And I'm pretty sure she knew that I was gay prior to this conversation. She had like one or two times mentioned kind of in conversation like, oh, those gay men that marry straight women that have the faith to do that. I just think that is one of the most impressive things ever.
And so you think she was hint dropping to you?
100% I do. And then there had been a time when there was kind of like an open conversation. She goes, oh, is there anything you want to tell me? That wasn't specifically about homosexuality, but it was a very like open, like let's share things kind of conversation. Mm-hmm. And I shared something with her, but it wasn't that. I don't remember what I shared. But I think that she could tell that there was something else going on. And so when I said that, I think these words made sense to her. And I remember her saying, well, what if I don't need that? Or what if we just, what if we continue to try to make it work? Again, neither of us mentioning the fact that I'm gay,
Right.
but her just saying, maybe you can feel these things over time. Maybe
Sure.
you can maybe it will develops, love grows. Maybe we can just give it more time. And I just kept saying, I've tried to give it time. And I just felt, I did feel it grow, but it got to a certain threshold that I just knew in my heart I couldn't surpass.
Yeah, there's a ceiling.
There was a ceiling, and my full body was touching that ceiling, like belly up against the ceiling, being crushed by the floor and the ceiling.
Yeah.
There was nowhere else to go, and I had to get out of that situation because it was becoming suffocating to me.
Right. And because of your sexuality, you can only love up to a certain point,
Right.
and then it's just the way it is.
Absolutely. And I think a big side of it for the question for me, that I don't think a lot of people think that we go through, especially straight people, is it wasn't just, hey, I want what I want kind of thing. It wasn't just selfishness. I did have feelings for this woman.
Of course.
And I wanted her to have the best, and I didn't want her to have a lifetime spending her life with the person who she's supposed to love more than anyone else, who every single day she's going to have to look at herself in the mirror and know that she's in a relationship where she can never get what she needs.
Right.
That she's going to be in a relationship where she doesn't feel loved in the way that she deserves to feel loved because that person truly doesn't love her. Where she is constantly going to have to struggle with her needs not being met.
Right.
And not just my needs not being met. And that was more heartbreaking to me than my own feelings. I'm always, too much so, a martyr. And I was going to throw myself, under the bus and to be unhappy for a lifetime in order to make her happy. But when I realized that wasn't going to happen either, I thought, what's the point?
Why am I doing this?
Why am I doing this? And so I really had to think about whether that was the best decision for us. And I made the decision myself that I didn't think it was best for either.
Right.
And I agree still with that decision, and I believe I always will. So we broke up, and it was hard. But after that, my life, it's 2017 now. That was in June of 2015.
Okay.
And I just remember my life fell apart after that.
Right.
Everything in my life fell apart. Suddenly, there was a small door in the back of my mind about me being gay that was always closed. And now suddenly it was open. And I kept trying to close it, and the door kept on popping back open.
Right.
And I couldn't close it. And I tried everything that I knew how to do. I tried nailing it shut, so to speak, and it would not stay closed. And for the first time, it wasn't just, I know that I'm gay, because I had known that a couple years early, but it was I know I'm gay, and this is affecting my ability to have a temple marriage.
Right.
What am I supposed to do now?
Which is hugely devastating when you've been raised Mormon, because even as a kid, that's what you're leading up to. That's what, Sunday school is about for children, even, is about being righteous and then being able to have a temple marriage so that you can be with your family forever. And for whatever reason, I think if you can't have that, it's devastating. But especially when you feel like it's something about yourself you can't change, and that is ingrained naturally into you. Not that I'm saying it's not, it definitely is. But it's even more devastating, I think, when that's the problem.
Yeah. It wasn't...
As it were, not
right.
actually a problem.
Yeah, it wasn't the problem of... because this is a hard situation, too, of not finding someone with whom I could love, in the sense of there are many people with whom I could take to the temple, and I just haven't found the right one. It was, this isn't a reasonable path for me anymore.
Right. Or even just like, I'm burdened with sins that don't allow me to have a temple marriage.
Absolutely.
It's different.
And so it was terrible, and so I remember that was a hard time in my life. I was struggling with that. There was some drama going on in my family, some real heavy drama, and I was kind of coming to terms with, because Carol's family was great. I never met them, but the relationship that she had with her family, I realized wasn't a relationship I had with my family, or that I ever have had.
Right.
And so I felt particularly isolated there. And then I started having these memories of my past. That's when they started coming back, and these conversations I had with different things, things I had overheard my family or my father saying specifically, things I had heard from church members that I realized now were very, very hurtful.
Right.
And I just felt like I couldn't turn towards the church. It didn't have any answers. I couldn't turn towards a family or friends because, I turned towards friends, but family I just felt I couldn't turn towards. I had too many feelings I was figuring out just with my family in general at that time.
Right.
And I just felt like all the foundations of my life had suddenly just been shattered. And now I had to rebuild my life instantly.
Right.
And there's a lot of pieces to your life, and that's a lot of work to rebuild. And I ended up going to a heavy depression, but fortunately not the debilitating depression where I wasn't able to do anything. I actually had a very, very strong resolve to do something, because I think I was afraid my depression was going to swallow me up and I was going to be trapped forever.
Right.
And I said, I have to fight now while I still have the energy, because I don't know if I will in a couple of days.
Yeah, depression is an energy-sucking force, basically, and it definitely, when you're in it, feels, you get very fatalistic. It feels like you're never getting out.
Right.
Which is obviously not true.
Right.
And there, for different people in different ways, you get out. But I understand the feeling.
Yeah.
That you can't escape.
And I was terrified of that, and I didn't want to feel that way. And I had felt that way before in my life and kind of overcome it. But this one was on a scale I'd never felt before. And I just had to claw my way through everything. And I kind of put family in the back burner, kind of ignored them for a moment.
Right.
I had some things I needed to deal with, and there was drama that I just couldn't put any energy towards. I just didn't have that energy to give.
Right.
And so I turned towards my bishop, and I believe I had told a few bishops before that I was gay.
Okay.
One prior to my mission, I told him that I viewed pornography,
Right.
and it was gay pornography. And that was all that we ever said. Nothing more was talked about.
Okay.
So I guess that's outing myself, but who knows.
Bishops are kind of like therapists. They're not supposed to tell anyone.
Right.
And, I mean, especially if he's not even willing to talk to you about it, it's
Right.
he's probably not going to tell anyone else about it.
Correct. And so I was at a singles ward at the time, and so I went and I told my bishop, and the experience was not positive.
Is this our singles ward? Or a
No,
different
it's
one?
not.
Okay.
Lane
Lane and I go to singles ward together.
Yes, it is an unmentioned singles ward, but our
Okay.
singles ward will eventually come in because my experience with our current bishop was significantly different than anything
Right.
I've ever experienced.
I would have been surprised if you had said that our
Yeah.
singles ward, that our bishop was anything less than positive.
Right, it was great. It saved me, truly. But I remember I went and I told my bishop, and the first thing that he did, was kind of say, okay, well, I'm sorry, this is a lot, this is going on.
Of course.
And he said a line that I understand what he meant to say, but it was very hurtful. And it was essentially what he said was, I'm sorry, but this is out of my scope of practice.
Okay.
You need to go, and this is higher than my pay grade.
Wow. Yeah, that's... Nope.
And so I understood what he meant, and hey, this is a bigger issue than I have the tools to handle with.
Right.
But those are better words.
Yes.
And so I didn't like that because I felt he was very dismissive about it, and he was like, hey, go see a counselor. And he's like, but go see a counselor so you can become temple worthy. And I was like, that's not what this is about.
Right.
This isn't about worthiness right now. Because during that time I did fall into pornography again because I needed some sort of an outlet for something.
Right.
And I was lonely and isolated, and that encouraged pornography a lot. And so that was something I was doing. And he's like, oh, hey, you just need to stop viewing pornography and everything's going to be fine. And I'm like, no, that's not what the issue is.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I get that pornography is an issue, but that's not the issue right now.
He thinks that your homosexuality problems are related to your pornography
Correct.
problems, directly.
Right.
Instead of, not that homosexuality is a problem, but in his mind, that those two things are linked, and if you take away one, take away the other.
Right.
Which is not true.
Whereas the pornography issues were there because I was a homosexual.
Right.
And I had no sexual outlet, and I thought, if I'm going to sleep with a man or view pornography, which one is a lesser sin?
Right.
I'll view pornography because that's the lesser sin. And so
this,
that's what I would do.
And this brings up to me, we've had this conversation before about the choices you have to make when you're gay and a member of the church. And it's do I marry a woman, or do I, view pornography, or do I have relationships, and now it's do I get married, because the church isn't going to recognize it, and that could get me excommunicated. And you have to make so many decisions like that and sacrifices that straight Mormons never have to think about.
Absolutely.
Never have to.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely talk more about that forever, I'm sure. because there's a lot to talk about.
Right.
But so I kind of started a very, very long and spiritual process where I did go to counseling, and I felt nothing for that counselor at all. And the whole time he was just talking about, pornography, and I was like, that's great, I get it. Again, I get it, but that's not the issue here.
Yeah.
If I wasn't gay, I wouldn't have such a need to view pornography because I need to express myself sexually
somehow,
and I don't have any outlet to be able to do it.
Right.
All of them are closed, and I have to find one. And so I eventually moved into a new ward. I got a new job. I kind of needed to get away. And so I moved a little bit further up north where I currently am, or at least in the ward I'm currently am. And I remember that I was there for a couple of months before I really ever talked to anybody. I mostly didn't want to associate. But I remember that I needed to start talking about it. And so I had one of my brothers I was becoming a lot more close with at the time. I have 3 older brothers, no sisters. And I was talking to my middle brother. And so him and I were talking, and I told him that I was gay because I need to tell someone. He's like, yeah, I know. I've known forever. He had even asked me before if I was gay, and I said no. And I know he didn't believe me. And so he laughed, and he's like, yeah, thanks for telling me, kind of a thing.
Sure.
And then we started talking about more things, and more things came up that we can talk about on this podcast if we want. I have no issue talking about them, but it's not my goal.
Right.
We start talking up some abuse I had experienced growing up, and mostly verbal and emotional, but also some sexual abuse that I had experienced, and some abuse that was kind of on the verge of physical from not just one person, from various people. I've been abused in different capacities by different people, and I just hadn't really connected that it was abuse.
Right.
And so as I was kind of talking about that somehow in the conversation, because my brother was asking if I'd had any experiences with any men, and I was like, oh yeah, well this happened when I was a 4-year-old, and this happened when I was, 10 or something, and he's like, Lane, that's not normal. And I'm like, oh, I guess it isn't, is it? And it just didn't connect, and you should probably talk to someone about this. And we ended up, he had heard through the grapevine about a gay Mormon therapist who was married to a woman.
Right.
And so we set up an appointment, and guess who it was? The same person who I read his blog.
Nice.
And so that was really cool. And as we were talking about kind of my experience, he said, oh, I think that's my blog that you read.
Right.
And
that's
I
adorable.
connected the dot, and it was, and I was like, I'm truly supposed to be here.
Right.
And that particular person, shout out again, Josh Weed, helped me immensely in my life. And he really helped me to remove. Now, he very specifically is not an LDS family therapist. He isn't in that system.
Right.
Because from my understanding, he doesn't want to feel bound in the counsel that he gives.
Gotcha.
And so therefore he removes his affiliation with the church, specifically in his professional aspect, so that he can give advice based on what he thinks is best for the person and not attributing what church doctrine is into it.
Right, because then he'd be bound to church policy
Absolutely.
and everything, instead of being able to give you advice about his personal opinions.
Correct.
Right.
Which was extremely helpful for me, because he understood the church in every way. He's an active member, but he also understood my circumstance, and he was telling me what he actually felt. It was everything I needed. But as we gradually kind of went along more there and had a lot of healing, which I'll kind of talk about, I eventually went to my bishop as well, my current bishop. And I remember that I sat down with him and kind of this, hey, I'm a new member, let me get to know you, let you get to know me kind of a thing.
Right.
But very quickly, I shot out in our conversation, okay, Bishop, there's something I need to tell you, and I'm gay. And he just looked at me and he said, okay, why are you telling me this? And I was so taken aback, because I'm not sure if people know what it's like, but it's funny because the doctrine of the church is that it isn't a sin to be gay.
Right.
All of the quote-unquote sin is based on your actions of performing gay deeds.
Gay deeds, sorry.
It's the best I can...
I love it.
I can find words for.
I
but
love it.
The feelings themselves, the temptation, quote-unquote, itself, isn't a sin.
Right.
But even so, every single time I had to tell someone, especially Bishop, it felt like a confession.
Yeah.
It felt like I was confessing something deep and dark and feral inside of me, something that was nasty and impure. And it just felt like I had to confess the secret and then be like, help me.
Right.
Which is very much so how a lot of people handle it. I've been, for different things, but I think all kind of relating towards homosexuality, because I am kind of remembering more bishops I had come out to in different ways. The answer is always counseling.
Right.
And I don't think I realized it then, but I realize it now. That's so confusing, because if you are a gay man who isn't performing any gay actions, and you go and tell your bishop, hey, I'm gay, and their response is, oh, we need to send you to counseling? What are they counseling you for?
Right.
Are they counseling you for not having tools to not act on your desires? Because you're already not doing that.
Right.
So what is the counseling for? Is it for you to overcome your homosexuality?
Mm-hmm.
Is it for you to no longer be gay? Is it for homosexuality not to run your life? The whole thing is very confusing. So why am I there? Am I there to be fixed? Am I there to be temple worthy? Because guess what? I already am.
Yeah.
So why am I here, and why is this always the solution?
Yeah, it's gay equaling, or gay needs counseling equaling, like being gay needs to be punished in some way or corrected.
Correct.
But if the policy is already that there's nothing wrong with you and you're not doing anything wrong, but every time someone hears about it, they try to give you something, like it is wrong, then very confusing.
Yeah, it gets terribly confusing. And so the fact that he didn't do that, I was even more confused because that's what I had come to expect.
Right, he's doing it right, and now that's what's confusing you, which is terrible.
And I thought to myself, what is going on? And he just said, why are you telling me this? I said, well, I thought it was something that you deserved to know. Sure. It's something I'm dealing with. And he goes, okay, but I don't ask other members for their sexuality. I don't ask them for their preferences. So why do you feel the
straight? Right. Are you bi?
Right. He
said,
you
asexual?
100%.
No.
And so he said, I don't feel the compulsion, or I don't understand the compulsion that you feel that you have to tell me. And I kind of told him some past experiences, and he was heartbroken. And I told him I was seeing a therapist, and I asked him to help pay for some of the sessions, and he agreed, because my brother was paying for a few sessions, and then because I didn't have the money to do it.
Right.
Counseling's expensive, and we ended up having a fallout because I was becoming more and more inclined towards homosexuality, towards pursuing a love-based relationship.
Right.
And my brother had the intention of me going to the counselor so that I could learn how to marry a woman, as this counselor had done.
Right. He wanted you to end up in the same situation as this counselor.
Absolutely.
So he's accepting that you're gay, but he isn't wanting you to be in gay relationships.
Right. Which, there is fairness to that.
Right.
Because he wants an eternal family, and, based off of our doctrine, I have to be in an eternal marriage, therefore with a woman, in order for me to have an eternal relationship with my brother and his family. So there's truth there in the gospel. There's legitimacy. But the way that it was handled, he was very upset about it, and he felt like it was a waste of his time. And I think the quote that he said was, "This is going against my purpose for sending you," or something in that regard that really made it stark and clear that he had an objective. He actually, I think, said the word objective.
He had an agenda with you.
He did. He had a purpose in sending me there, and it wasn't just me getting help. And he asked if I was getting help and if it was making my life better. And I said, more than anything has in my entire life. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, and then we fought about a few other things, and it was a really nasty conversation for both of us because, it was tough and it was hard, and neither of us, I think, handled it perfectly at all. And then I get, I think, a text message or a phone call, I believe it was a text message from him not too long after that, and he goes, oh, it's become too expensive, I can't pay for it anymore. Right. Which, for the record, if any of us struggle with money in the family, it isn't him.
Right, it's because you're not ending up how he wants you to.
Correct. And so telling Bishop and so that's around the time I told my bishop. I asked for him to help pay for the sessions, and he did for a couple of more, and I saw some more, and I kind of did that, and that long answer gets to the how I came to terms and when I came to terms with me being gay was really through that counseling that took place. So it was around 25 to 26.
That's great. And it's great that I think it's important that it shows that bishops have different reactions to these kind of things, and that like some of them are better equipped to handle them than others. And I would like to assume that things are getting better, and that more bishops are like our bishop, who is really supportive, who is really, kind, and who really, understood what you needed and kind of like made up for the lack where your family was pretty closed off. But who knows?
Who knows?
Hopefully that's the direction that we're going. How have your friends been since you've come out? Because that, I think, is also a really dangerous thing, right? If your family's not supportive, you're really hopeful that your friends will be supportive of you being gay, but when you're in such a conservative Christian community, like Mormons are, it's really iffy whether or not they're going to be supportive or whether or not they're going to be suddenly wholly uncomfortable with you. Have you had experiences of both, or have people been pretty supportive?
Great question. Yes, I have had experiences of both, but I was incredibly pleasantly surprised when vast majority, have been very positive.
Oh, good.
I've had a few people outwardly express dislike for my decisions.
Right.
Most people that disliked it just didn't say anything, which I'm perfectly okay with.
Right.
But when I came out, because when I introduced myself in the new ward, I decided that I wasn't going to pretend to be straight, where somebody asked if I was gay or anything like that. I was going to say I was, but I wasn't coming out as like, hey everyone, I'm the new gay guy.
Right.
And so I was still kind of transitioning, but as I believe all the ward knows now, or at least anyone who knows me knows now.
That's true. Singles wards are, people come in and out, so I'm sure some people don't know.
Absolutely. But I was very, very surprised. Before I told my family, I actually had a council of a whole bunch of my friends, because I was under the impression that my family was going to essentially disown me and never talk to me again.
Right.
Which didn't happen, but they haven't been supportive either.
Isn't the case, but they're not great as far as dealing with it.
And so I was prepared, and I needed a social group. And it was funny because I actually invited Carol, the woman who I essentially broke her heart because I couldn't love her enough, who also, by the way, is married in the temple now and has a great relationship, so that's wonderful.
That's great. I was going to ask. So,
yeah.
Good.
I know that, and that's about all that I know, but I invited her to that because I wanted her to know that I was gay, but I couldn't do it face-to-face. I couldn't do it one-on-one, and she deserved that, but I just couldn't do it. It was too raw and emotional, and there's too many feelings going on. So I kind of invited her into this big old circle of friends. Most of them were there physically, but I had a couple that Skyped in, and I just told essentially my story I told a little bit about, I kind of gave them a precursor saying, okay, we're going to talk about some very, very heavy topics here.
Right.
If you cannot support me through this, I will not judge you. Step out now, but I'm really going to have to lean on you.
Yeah.
And then I told them that I was gay, but I also told them about some of my past abuse because I'd never really talked about that before.
Right.
And I'd wanted to share it with some friends, but I really didn't know what my intention with sharing it with them was.
Right.
Besides the fact that I hadn't even told my family and I hadn't told anyone, and I wanted to be able to at least express it.
Well, the worst thing with abuse is to not talk about it.
Right.
Like it just has such a terrible power over you when you don't.
Absolutely. And so I shared that with them, and they were kind of like, oh my gosh. But everyone was very good about it, and they expressed love, and some were very proactive about it, and some checked in with me all the time, and whenever I'd go to therapy. There was one particular friend, I'll give him a shout out because it'll make his life complete.
Do it.
His name is Addison, and every single time I would go to a therapy session, I would call him. I'd say, Addison, because Addison is a member of the church. Okay. He grew up in the church, and he no longer attends, but at the time he was attending. But he was always very, very good at, and still is, at playing devil's advocate.
Gotcha.
And you usually don't have people play devil's advocate when it comes to church doctrine.
Right.
And so it was nice where I knew that I could say, hey, I'm having these weird, crazy thoughts. Am I going too far? Or like, is this crazy? And I could always bounce ideas off of him, and he never made me feel I was ridiculous or stupid or made me feel judged for wondering if it would actually bring me happiness to have a same-sex relationship.
Right.
Or anything like that a lot of church members would say, oh no, don't do that. That's of the devil. The devil's, encouraging that. That has nothing to do with the Lord. This counselor is evil. But he was very, very good about that. And I had a few other friends that I really talked to a lot, and I gradually kind of stopped talking to some friends about it because you could tell it was a little bit too much for them.
Right.
And I kind of found who to talk to about what.
You got to read the room.
Right, got to read the room. And I eventually formed more friends, such as yourself and others, that I really felt open to talk to about. But overall, I've been very pleasantly surprised in general with people who have handled it, but specifically around our age, specifically our generation,
Right.
has been a lot better about the issue than some people that are older. And that has just been, really, without that, I don't know what I would have. Without my counselor, who is wonderful, without my bishop, who is wonderful, without my friends, I really needed all three of those.
Right.
And without all three of those, I don't know what would have happened. I truly don't. But my bishop gave me hope that there would be room for me in the church.
Right.
My counselor helped me to remove the shame from homosexuality that I had, and my friends made me feel loved and supported no matter what I did. And it was everything that I needed. And so, yeah.
Good, that's great. I'm glad that you had friends to be there for you. There's a phrase, blood is thicker than water, but the actual whole phrase is now I just forgot it. It's the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So it's actually the opposite of what people
Interesting.
think. Because blood is thicker than water is supposed to be like family is more important than friends or other people. But the phrase actually means like the people that you bind yourself to by choice are the more important ones, are the closer ones, and the ones that kind of are more affected in your life. And I think that's pretty much shown with what you've told us, that it's really about the people that you choose to have with you. And I'm glad that you chose some great people that are supportive of you.
I'm glad that I found them in my life.
Yeah.
This has been another episode of I Like to Look for Rainbows. Please join us again next time.
All the things that I love might be over, and I'm stuck here, both hands full of closure. But I'm not sorry for me. I know that it's not my fault. Not